Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. Ukraine War Frontline update for the 23rd of July 2024. Sorry I am so behind on my videos today. It's mainly because of the mapping, and it's my own fault. Well, it's the fault that there's been so much news that I've been unable to do my normal things in the order I've been wanting to do them. This mapping update, and I haven't been able to do deep state, has taken hours and hours because I've left it sort of 3 days plus, which means there are so many pins on this map. The Russians have seemingly made some fairly substantial gains right across the front line, but that's because I haven't done a frontline update for so many days. Okay, so bear that in mind when you see the map itself. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please pause the video and check out the key. So there are a lot of pins, and most of them are Russian red or similar. There are a few blue pins, and we're actually going to start the mapping with some. A few, I haven't got the auto summarized summarized report of the ISW summary, so it's a summary of a summary that Benny Pie has done for me on my atpgeo.youtube.erg.uy. So ATP distilled. If you go to ATP distilled, that distills all my videos into summary, not quite transcripts, they're third person summaries, like Jonathan said this, Jonathan said that. So if you look at my video this morning already up there, if you don't have time to watch my video, you can have a look at it summarized into useful different categories here, and that's absolutely fantastic. So you can just spend 10 minutes reading that rather than half an hour listening to me, and it should give you the relevant information. Well, on this brilliant website that Benny has sorted out, there is an ISW daily report AI summary, and I'm not quite sure exactly when it produces it. UK time, I think it goes from it probably generates around midday or so. So this is still the 21st. So it's not last night's one, but nonetheless, there are a few interesting points on here. Notable anecdotes. The wife of a Russian service member fighting in the vicinity of Lipsy, which we're going to look at in a second, complained that her husband is fighting without adequate supplies of food and water. Another use of motorbikes, assault motorbikes, this time in Chaziv Yar as opposed to Urizhny. But yeah, lack of food and water there. Deputy Commander of the Ukrainian Brigade reported in this Kharkiv Oblast area that recently deployed Russian personnel are receiving minimal training before being sent to the front lines. Okay, so a couple of points, anecdotes there to suggest things aren't good for the Russians. Remember, we're always trying to work out, just generally what the state of affairs is for the Russian army. They are making huge losses. The morale does seem to be low, and the claims are that certainly up in this area, they are being sent without requisite training and are struggling for food and water. Yeah, it's a real struggle. Now, for Suryat Maps, we have some. I'm not going to bring up Suryat Maps' tweets individually for each area because there will be so many, because it's been 3 days. So tomorrow, hopefully, I'll get it back on. And I also don't have Deep State Maps line up here because I haven't had time to update Deep State Maps line. So we've got Andrew Perpetua in blue and Suryat Maps in red. There are some gains just to the northeast of Vovchansk for the Ukrainians, pushing back in that area. There are claims that Staritsia has been cleared as well. So although Andrew Perpetua doesn't have that under Russian control, Suryat Maps has it as grey zone with the Russians controlling just outside of Staritsia. But this has been apparently cleared out now. That reporting from Ukraine had a video on this. I don't know how far that goes because it's quite a long settlement that sort of merges into Burakvatka there. But nonetheless, the Ukrainians have been pushing back in a number of areas along particularly this northeastern sector of the two Kharkiv Oblast sectors. Right, okay, we're going to come down to the northeastern axis from Kupiansky to Svatovo to Crimea, and as you can see, quite a few areas of Russian advance. Remember, we were worrying about 10,000 Russian soldiers accumulated around here to push onto Borova. Then there was a theory that it might push up north of Borova and come down. I don't know whether the Russians simply don't have the personnel for such a big push that would take this amount of land. What they are capable of doing at the moment appears to be just grinding successes that continue on, and this is slightly, well, very worrying up here from Krokmalna onwards, as they are advancing further and further, and they're not a crazy distance really from the Oskil River here. As according to Syriac maps, they are only sort of 8 kilometers from that. So just a long way in their current situation, but they've managed to get since they took, if you assume that Syriac maps is correct, from sort of Krokmalna, they've managed to get the same amount of distance over the last couple of months. So, you know, they're not too far away from being able to do some serious, well, take some significant territory in order to get to the Oskil River there, and it could be a case of just slowly grinding out expansion north and south of that bridgehead, and that's a real worry for the Ukrainians. So here we have some gains along here, sort of southwest of Tobaivka, directly west of Krokmalna. They're moving along this, I guess, the low point where the river comes in, and is this Pischane? Yeah, Pischane here, which seems to be now, at least partly, possibly largely, but according to Syriac maps, entirely under the control of the Russians. So there is, differing interpretation as to how well the Russians are doing there, but Pischane seems to be in the midst of falling to the Russians. And then as we come further to the southeast here, we have Novoselivska, and just north of there on the way to Berestova, the Russians now appearing to be partially, and according to Syriac maps, entirely controlling Berestova there. So that is a concern, with some further gains to the southeast of Berestova between Novoselivska and Berestova. So making these gains and moving on this tree line as according to Syriac maps. Remember this morning in my hits and losses video, Andrew Perpetua was talking about these YOLO attacks that you're seeing more and more often. So for example, what that is, it's just you only live once. YOLO, it's kind of an internet acronym, isn't it? The idea, and I'm not saying this has happened here, but what Andrew Perpetua is saying is that the Russians are just doing these suicide attacks that really should be destroyed much earlier. They're usually only in 1 or 2 vehicles, right? But had the Ukrainians had enough artillery ammunition, they'll be able to put a stop to these attacks much sooner. But you get these hurtling attacks along, say, a tree line, where they'll just absolutely leather it down a tree line in the hope that they make it to some significant target area, and to then get blown up right at the end here. So they don't necessarily succeed, and this is why, and as Andrew Perpetua said, this can be why certain mappers, no names mentioned, Syriac maps, will claim that the Russians control the kind of ground that they do, because they're doing these YOLO attacks. 2 things. 1, they end up getting destroyed, so they don't control that area. 2, they should be destroyed much sooner than they are. Sometimes they're getting like 2 kilometers through what was previously mined areas, maybe not mined anymore, and they are just managing to travel quickly, but not that effectively, because they do often end up in violent disassembly of the vehicle with personnel on board, although sometimes they do manage to get people to that target area, and whether they can then get subsequent YOLOs to that same place and then restock and actually take that area, I don't know. So there probably are successes in amongst the not so successful YOLO attacks, these kind of suicidal banzai drives into enemy territory, but we saw that down by Novomykhailivka, south of Novomykhailivka, I think, where the Russians really got. In fact, I'll take you there now. So one such attack that was caught on camera, I think, was a YOLO along here to this road just to the north east of Vuhledar, between Vuhledar and Konstantinivka, and they basically got pretty much to the road once, and then were taken out. And there are possible claims that these are sort of YOLO attacks that don't necessarily signify control of these territories, but there might also be subsequent moves by the Russians to control those areas. Anyway, just watch out for that. So that could explain why there are often big differences between, say, Andrew Perpetua's mapping, where he waits for a day or so of confirmed control of areas before changing the mapping, or people operating in trench lines rather than just a vehicle driving up a tree line. So we come on further to the south, some more gains along this axis as well. This time just south of Myasozharivka, into Andriivka, another Andriivka like the one by Bakhmut. And we have it's an equally small village with a few houses. Russians seem to be in control of that. Again, according to Surat maps, not Andrew Perpetua. So there's quite a big difference around the Stelmakivka area and all south of there with regard to these two mappers, and you can see that there. Right, then when we come further down to the south, there's some more gains for the Russians before we even get to sort of Crimea area. Here we have some gains in the fields just west of this gully. This river area, southwest of Ploschanka there. Do you remember the days of talking about Chervonopopivka and Krasnoyarchenska? My goodness, seems like an age ago when the Ukrainians were fighting over this river, the Krasna River. Chervonopopivka there, but no longer. The Russians are pushing further and further to the west, taking some ground there, again, according to Surat map. So you can see really consistently along here, there's a big difference between the mappers. I don't know what underwrites that difference all the time. I know some of the times it's for the reasons given. Right, here we come to some good news for the Ukrainians. This is good news for a couple of reasons. One is that it is north of the river. So the Russians were seemingly very close to, well, on a 2D map looking like this, very close to being able to take the Ukrainian positions by putting pressure on this area from both the north, the east, and then possibly the west or northwest up here. And that seems to have changed of late. That would have been very difficult for the Russians because, as I've shown you before, when we go into the 3D rendering of this is really difficult for the Russians. This is a one-to-one rendering of the topography here, which means that there's no emphasis on this. It's one-to-one, which means that's very difficult, right? You've got a river, you've got to bridge that river literally to get any mechanized equipment across, and then you're straight into a mountain. Right, so you're going to have a lot of trouble crossing this river. In fact, the Severodonetsk River has seen Seversky Donetsk River has been the graveyard of quite a lot of Russian equipment in several attempts to get across where is it? It wasn't Bilorivka, but it was around here anyway. One of the places around here where the Russians lost 100 pieces of kit. It might be much further over here, to be honest, because it was earlier in the war. I'll have to go and find out exactly where that was. But anyway, nonetheless, it's very difficult for the Russians to get across the river there. Now, it turns out that the Ukrainians, and Andrew Perpetua did a nice little short video yesterday where he looked at the evidence. So the Russians were shelling areas of this, unfortunately causing devastation to the forest area, of this little meander. You've got almost an oxbow lake. You've got these serious meander in the river there, which is I believe it's moved from there, which is somewhere in here. I believe I can't quite remember, but it might well be in around there. So anyway, some serious shelling of Ukrainian forces there. I don't think it was back there. Anyway, that has caused a change in Andrew Perpetua's mapping, such that the Russian defensive lines are now much further back. Ignore this line there. It's because we had to split polygons into different chunks. So this is your Russian defensive line, as according to Andrew Perpetua, and it was all the way down here. So the Russians are not in control of nearly as much of this forest area as was previously thought. In fact, his last data set, or his last mapping change from this kind of area, was something like May last year, or he might have said it was 14 months ago. So it's May last year. It's just very difficult to know what's going on in the forest areas, because it's quite a challenge to geolocate areas that are just covered in trees. You don't get the landmarks that you get elsewhere. Nonetheless, this is good news. The Russians have been pushed back, and it just means so the two things is that like I said earlier, second part to that being that actually this keeps Bilharivka looking a little bit safer. It's a very difficult area for the Russians to take anyway. And what you want is Seversk to be protected. Now, there's challenge to Seversk coming up from the southeast here, which is definitely a worry. But if the Russians are being held back, and in fact the Ukrainians have more control of land up here in the forest area, then that is really good news for the Ukrainians. So again, some massive differences in the mappers, the two mappers here around the Bilharivka area, with the Surat maps having a much more charitable interpretation of affairs for the Russians there, and the same can be said for this entire area. Now, I think this was one of these areas that could have been a bit of a YOLO. There was a Russian flag on top of a destroyed building here, and Andrew and his team were unsure whether this was dropped by drone, whether the people that were there around the building previously were maybe Ukrainian soldiers, and then the video cuts, and then there's a flag on top of the drone, which we know on top of the building, which we know are very often dropped by drones. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that Russians control this area, or Russians did a bit of a YOLO in there, and they were Russian troops. They whacked a flag up, but don't necessarily control it. It's either grey zone, or they did a sort of a bit of a run the gauntlet, get in there, drop a flag, and run away again. So it's a bit unsure as to what's going on here. Surat Maps has this therefore completely under control of the Russians, and that includes quite a lot of land where there's not a lot of stuff. So it's difficult to know. It's not like there are constantly people walking around all these places with flags going, we own this, we own this, we own this, we control this. Just lots of open land that they might or might not have some semblance of control over. Okay, then as we come to the west of there, we've got Andrew Perpetua agreeing with a previous claim from Surat Maps that the Russians do have control of Rozdilivka and surrounding area. There was a flag, again, it was another flag situation where although this was much more obviously a contested area, and the Russians were fighting in Rozdilivka, and then there was a flag put up, and it was waiting some time to see whether that really did translate into actual control of the town. And it seems like Rozdilivka is now under control of the Russians. And then when we come further to the south, we come to Chasiv Yar here, where the Russians to the north of Kalinivka, Bodinivka, have taken some more land. This could be an attempt to try and get across the canal at some point other than these two culvert pinch points that are now going to be very closely monitored by the Ukrainians. And so it's going to be very difficult for the Russians to get across there, because they'll be telegraphing what they're attempting to do. They will also need to get vehicles through a very difficult sort of forest area before getting over the culvert. So, and that's the case in both places. So that's actually quite difficult. You might see attempts to cross the canal further to the south or further to the north. Andrew was saying that the south is probably a better option. I can't remember why. But of course, with Klishivka still holding out here, no real change there for some time. Again, massive difference between the two mappers all the way along here, actually. Andrew is much happier with saying that a lot of this area is grey zone rather than Russian control. Surat Maps is huge Russian control over and above what Andrew has. So yeah, no change here for a long time otherwise in the Klishivka area, and that actually helps to protect Chasiv Yar. So it'll be interesting to see what happens further to the north in this area. Cold tea. Okay. moving further to the south from Chasiv Yar, we come to an area where this, I don't know if this is a counterattack or a rejig, but Andrew Perpetua in the Pivnichne, Druzhba area along this railway line north of the Turetsk sector has the Ukrainians either pushing back or there's a rejig and the Russians didn't quite control as much as he had initially thought. That's good news for the Ukrainians because the Russians have been pressuring all over here, and as you can see further to the south, it's a bit of a nightmare for the Ukrainians. The Russians are, at least according to Suret maps, the Russians were previously in control of a small kind of bridgehead up there like that they've now expanded around here. So this is where the previous lines were, and they've kind of filled in a little bit of this area to the east of the sector, and then some more here moving westwards, controlling, if Suret maps is correct, importantly controlling all of these high buildings on the outer areas of Turetsk. So Turetsk is getting absolutely hammered. It's horrible there. The Russians are just doing their usual liberation approach to any town, which is send as much ordnance in and flatten a place, and it doesn't matter if you kill any of the people living there, because liberation, you're liberating them from life, it appears. But yeah, it is a worry that these are very useful buildings for sighting. It's a bit like down in Vuhledar. You can get good sight over everywhere around, and you can release ATGMs and so on and so forth. Well, the Russians might have taken control of over those if Surat maps is correct, and that will be certainly a challenge for the Ukrainians. Andrew Perpetua not agreeing quite yet with that, but does have an increase in control that actually extends past Suret maps in this particular area. Has the Russians controlling all the way up to here. Surat maps has some increase around this part of the front here, but yeah, you can see that it's a bit chaotic with pins because there's been such a lot of movement over the last 3 or 4 days. Now, a major increase in territorial control comes around this Zalizhny area, and you get these tailings spoils heaps there. It's quite a mining area, right? And this is as you start coming down towards the north of the Avdiivka, just to give you a sense of where this is. So you've got the Avdiivka sector here, which is now really the Pokrovsk region. They're moving towards this T0504 highway from Konstantinivka to Pokrovsk. That's the Russians moving towards that. They're also moving westwards generally towards Pokrovsk. Then you've got New York, and there's that long thin salient up there. And then you've got Turetsk, and in Turetsk you have these different areas where they're attacking, northern, and then just up through some of these other areas of what's essentially a conurbation here. Pivnichne up there and Zalizhny down here. Now, this area of Zalizhny and past these large sort of high heaps and whatnot, the Russians have now just taken all of this land, it appears, over the last few days. Even Andrew Perpetua has them pushing much further on, controlling these hills. Surat maps has the control going more into the urban areas of I guess Kitry, Renok, and further to the south in general. So yeah, quite a lot of changes to the map in that area, fairly significant gains for the Russians. And you know, this then puts any Ukrainians in this general area here under further pressure, because you know, trying to supply those Ukrainian troops is going to be difficult. Now, the Ukrainians have been trying to fight back, and they have pushed the Russians out of part of the New York bridgehead, certainly to the northwest of the town, or the northwest of the bridgehead, on the west of the town. But at the same time, the Russians are gaining to the northeast, so they've added this whole section on here, as according to Surat maps, and then according to Andrew Perpetua, this kind of area there. So either way, both mappers would agree that the Russians are pushing on to that east, in that northeastern direction, and the Ukrainians may be pushing further to the west there. But that's there's not. I don't think there's any more Ukrainian gains. So that's the end of the Ukrainian gains, and it's all Russia from then on in. So some more gains further to the south of there, according again to Suriyat maps only, on that New York bridgehead, just widening the base of that there. And then when we come to the northern Pokrovsk, northern part of the Pokrovsk sector, we have Andrew Perpetua essentially agreeing with what Suriyat maps had previously said, in that the Russians are successfully moving towards Vodvizhenka, and that's, as mentioned, towards that main supply line between Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka. That's now closed to the public, has been for some time. And then we have further gains inside some of these fields and in some of these villages as well, according to both mappers, to differing degrees in different places. Lozovatska under the Russian control, as well as areas north of this is at the railway line coming out of Ocheritina there towards Prokhorez. The Russians in control of most, if not all of that village, with Suriyat maps having them move further along the railway line to the west and also north of that railway line, and Andrew Perpetua a little bit to the south as well. So as you can see, all of this area gained, according to Andrew Perpetua. Suriyat maps had that previously, and they're just adding on a little bit. The direction of travel is fairly clear to see, which is there are just grinding increases of control for Russian territory that's going to keep going on until they reach this road. That'll be a really bad news for the Ukrainians, or that they reach the major fortifications that are probably somewhere around here, the Ukrainian fortifications, where they will be more properly dug in with concrete bunkers and proper constructed trench lines and whatnot. Further to the south, here around the Karlivka area, we have the Netailove, Pervomaisky. They're just moving slightly further. Well, actually, this is Andrew Perpetua agreeing with what Suriyat maps had said previously, with the Russians moving on towards Karlivka there along the reservoir. And then we have this area just to the northeast of Novelska. Novelska is that small agricultural settlement that have been holding out for an awful long time. Unsure as to what's going on there, because there seems to be part of it under control of the Russians, part of it seems to be in a grey zone, so still fighting, I would assume, going on there. But this is one of the areas that stopped the Russians from flanking. Previously it was Pervomaisky, but then Pervomaisky fell, and the Ukrainians still kept hold of that. Further to the south, you've got Krasnohorivka, which is all getting filled in, if you like. Large area here that was filled in, as according to Andrew Perpetua. You can see that the blue line would have gone like this, and now it's all up here. Now, Suriyat maps has much greater control for the Russians here. Andrew Perpetua is more likely to think that this is mainly grey zone, but that is a really significant difference when it comes to interpreting control within an urban area. That's a kilometre of difference, but it's quite, although that's a parkland there, or a central kind of park, much of the rest of this is fairly densely populated or densely built up compared to other places. So it's interesting that there's such a big disagreement between these mappers. But anyway, according to Suriyat maps, the Russians making wide scale gains in Krasnohorivka right across the town. Again, that's 3 or 4 days worth of gains, though, so bear that in mind. Then when we come to Mariinka and Novoherivka, Russians making a few gains north of Pobieda, which is another agricultural village rather similar to Novelska that the Russians had struggled to take. Well, they're in control of that now, but they haven't made too many gains around here actually for a few weeks. So it's interesting they picked up activity in this area again, according to Suriyat maps. And then there seems to be this success for the Russians, but all of these successes, remember, will be coming at a cost to the Russians. And the question is, how long can they sustain those kinds of losses for that return on investment in terms of territorial gain? So if you're losing hundreds of people per square kilometre, is that really what you're happy, in exchanging, given that the size of the country is massive? But anyway, we won't go down that rabbit hole again. There is this success for the Russians here. They failed at Vuhledar. They failed to get up from the south. They seem to have failed at Novomykhailivka, losing 320 odd pieces of equipment, and then an awful lot of people as well, trying to get to Konstantinivka to try and, basically attack Vuhledar from on the higher ground, coming along the same level of ground from the northeast. They seem to have failed to get to Konstantinivka, failed to get to Vuhledar, so they're going for the middle of that to try and get to that road. And as I've said previously, they've YOLO'd it to the road, but didn't succeed in interdicting it sustainably. And so they are just grinding away at these fields in the meantime and having some success there. Surat maps showing that they have made significant gains. Andrew probably going to wait until he sees more than just attacks in those areas and see that they actually control that land. And then again, Surat maps showing some gains in the Uruzhaini vicinity. So this time to the east of Uruzhaini, which is by this river that flows between Staromayorsky and Uruzhaini, a town that means a little sort of village that means harvest in English. But anyway, they've just a small triangle of land there. I've only put one pin there to signify that. And an area that took forever to change on a map, but it's an area that I've been waiting for those changes to be made. Andrew Perpetua finally made the changes, is Krinky. So Krinky, as we've understood for some time now, is not under the control of the Ukrainians and is not grey zone. But he's only recently changed his map to signify this, and that meant like a gazillion vertices. So every time it changes a direction here, that's a vertex, and you're having to drag all of this, it just takes forever and a day, right? So I just put one pin there that signified a change right across this whole area. And that alone was like an hour's worth of changing the map. So that has finally happened, and we were expecting that. They haven't been there for I think for a good few weeks, and realistically for longer than that in any meaningful way. So there you go. Lots of mapping changes. You can go and check out the changes in more detail. You can access this map yourselves. You guys can open this map whenever. It's always linked in the videos. I'm sorry it's been so many days since I've updated, and that means that it looks absolutely terrible for the Ukrainians. But I think it is genuinely challenging for the Ukrainians. There are interesting claims coming out that there is no effective counteroffensive taking place in the summer. It's not been effective at all. And we'll have a look at that now, actually, because it's probably a good time. There's news out that a Su-25 has also been shot down in the Donetsk area near Troitska. I don't know if that's Troitska. Typically my map has crashed because, that's what it does. Anyway, the only Troitska I remember in Donetsk, it's in Luhansk actually. Troitska in Luhansk is right up here in this area, and I don't think it's going to be that one at all. I don't know where it is, actually. I'd have to go and look. Oh, look. There it is. Troitska. There you go. Troitska. That's another Zaitsevi, another Turney. Goodness me. They've only got like 100 names, and they just recycle them around Ukraine. So anyway, I don't know where Troitska is, but there's been a shoot down of Troitska. There we go. Donetsk. So it could be... Oh, look. There's two Troitskas in Donetsk. So it could be... No, it's not going to be that one. Let's look for the other Troitska. This one. No. There'll be another Troitska somewhere. Anyway, a Russian plane has been shot down, as according to Status 6, a Su-25M, and that's caught on camera. So that's good news for the Ukrainians. Now, in terms of what I was talking about. There are claims that the Russian summer offensive has failed, and we'll just find that for you. Yeah, I just can't find it. I've been spending way too long looking for that. So there was an article suggesting, Russian summer counteroffensive has failed. I think the idea that you have quick counteroffensives these days, like that Kharkiv lightning counteroffensive that the Ukrainians did, and indeed a Kherson one, which was much more grinding, but still, effectively a large area of land taken like that. I think in the time of drones, you aren't going to expect that. So what the Russians can at most expect over this counteroffensive period is a slow grinding increase in area controlled by them at a huge cost. That's what we're seeing. I don't expect anything else, and the Ukrainians might well be happy enough to concede this territory in exchange for massive material and personnel loss for the Russians. As I've said to you a number of times, it's how easy that territory is to get back militarily. And just to let you know, that Su-25 was shot down in the Pokrovsk region, so somewhere around here. And in fact, there's two bits of footage of it being shot down. One from the ground, that you can see. Oh, where has it gone? Anyway, one from the ground, one from above, from a drone above it. So interesting. So that has definitely been shot down by a manpads. Might indicate that we're starting to see some more manpads get through to the front lines. I don't know, but good news that was shot down. There were actually two of those jets operating at the time. Here, just came across this as well. Russian assault detachment commander Leonid Kolomiets died in Vovchansk. But I don't, at 4:19, I don't give an F. I will kill everyone. Whoever dies first is a expletive. And then 1 minute later, he's dead. So, yeah, YOLO, I guess. But yeah, so a commander's died up. Anyway, that's enough from the Frontline update. There are other bits and pieces that could probably support everything I've said. But hopefully that's enough for you guys to get onto. And I'll release my subsequent videos out in a wee while. Thank you so much. Take care. Speak soon.